In many conversations, the most talkative person appears confident. They respond immediately, explain every thought, and fill every silence before it has time to settle. To most observers, this behavior looks like certainty. It looks like strength. But if you watch carefully, a different pattern begins to appear. In many environments, the individuals who hold the most influence often speak the least. They listen longer, reveal less, and when they finally choose to speak, people pay attention. This pattern is not accidental. Silence, when used intentionally, becomes a form of strategic advantage. It allows a person to observe dynamics that others miss. It protects information that others reveal too easily, and it creates a subtle psychological effect that shifts how people interpret authority. Most people misunderstand silence. They assume it signals uncertainty or hesitation. But in many cases, silence signals something else entirely: control. More than 2,000 years ago, the Chinese strategist Sun Tzu described a similar principle in The Art of War. He warned that those who reveal their position too quickly lose the advantage of observation. A strategist first studies the terrain. They watch how others move. They collect information before revealing their own intentions. In conversation, the terrain is social dynamics, and the person who studies those dynamics quietly often understands far more than the one trying to dominate the room. Today we will explore why intelligent individuals often speak less than others expect. Not because they lack opinions, not because they lack confidence, but because they understand something fundamental about human behavior. Words change the moment they leave your mouth. Information once revealed cannot be reclaimed. And in social environments, attention follows those who control when and how they speak. To understand this dynamic properly, we need to examine three forces that shape communication in social environments: observation, information control, and psychological gravity. Once you understand these forces, silence stops looking passive. It begins to look strategic. Let us begin with the first force: observation. Most people enter conversations with the instinct to participate immediately. They hear an idea and respond quickly. They fill pauses because silence feels uncomfortable. But silence serves a function. When someone speaks less, they gain something that talkative individuals often sacrifice: perspective. Observation requires attention, and attention requires space. Imagine entering a room where several people are discussing an idea. Opinions bounce back and forth rapidly, and the loudest voices dominate the conversation. In that environment, the individuals speaking the most are focused on expression. They are defending their ideas, explaining their positions, and reacting to the statements of others. But the quiet observer is operating differently. Instead of participating immediately, they are collecting information. They notice who interrupts others. They see who waits for approval before speaking. They observe which arguments gain support and which ones create resistance. These small details reveal the hidden structure of the room: who holds influence, who follows the group, who adjusts their position depending on social pressure. When someone speaks constantly, they lose the ability to notice these patterns. Their attention becomes divided between expression and observation. But silence creates a different advantage. It allows a person to see the conversation as a system, rather than simply reacting to it. And the individual who understands the system often gains more control over it. This brings us to the second force: information control. In many social situations, people reveal more than they intend. They share opinions impulsively, explain their reasoning completely, and disclose plans, frustrations, and personal perspectives in the moment. It feels natural. Conversation encourages openness. But intelligent individuals recognize that information functions as leverage. Every time you speak, you reveal something about your thinking, your priorities, your emotional reactions, and your assumptions. Once others understand these patterns, they can predict your responses, and prediction reduces influence. If people know exactly what you will say, your words lose their impact. Silence disrupts this pattern. When someone speaks selectively, others cannot easily predict their perspective. This uncertainty changes the dynamic of attention. People begin to listen more carefully when the quiet individual finally speaks, because their words are not constant. They carry weight. The ancient philosopher Lao Tzu captured this idea in a simple observation. He wrote that those who know do not speak excessively, and those who speak excessively often do not know. The meaning behind this statement is not about refusing to speak. It is about restraint. Restraint signals that a person chooses their words carefully rather than reacting automatically. This principle appears frequently in environments where strategy matters. Negotiators who reveal too much too quickly lose leverage. Leaders who speak impulsively create unnecessary resistance. Advisors who constantly agree lose credibility. But the individual who listens first, observes carefully, and speaks only when necessary often introduces the most influential ideas. Not because they speak louder, but because they speak with timing. Timing transforms information into impact. A well-placed statement can redirect an entire conversation. A carefully chosen question can reveal contradictions others overlooked. And a brief observation delivered at the right moment can carry more influence than 10 minutes of continuous explanation. This leads to the third force, psychological gravity. Human attention follows patterns of scarcity. Things that are constantly available often receive less attention. Things that appear selectively create curiosity. Communication follows the same rule. When someone speaks continuously, their voice becomes part of the background noise of the conversation. But when someone speaks rarely, their words interrupt that noise. Silence creates anticipation. Consider a meeting where several individuals speak frequently. Their ideas blend together because the flow of conversation never stops. Now imagine one person in the room who has remained quiet for most of the discussion. Eventually, someone turns toward them and asks a simple question. "What do you think?" In that moment, the room shifts. The silence surrounding that individual has created psychological gravity. Their response feels more important simply because it arrives after observation rather than constant participation. This effect appears in many areas of life. In classrooms, the student who rarely speaks often draws attention when they finally raise their hand. In professional environments, the colleague who contributes selectively often commands more attention than the one who comments on every idea. And in personal relationships, the individual who does not rush to fill every silence often appears more composed than the one who speaks constantly to maintain the conversation. This does not mean silence should replace communication. It means communication should become intentional. Silence is not the absence of confidence. Often it is the presence of discipline. The discipline to observe before reacting. The discipline to consider whether speaking adds value. And the discipline to recognize that not every thought requires immediate expression. There is another advantage to selective silence that is rarely discussed. It protects emotional control. When conversations become tense, many people react impulsively. They respond immediately to criticism and defend their position quickly. In these moments, silence creates distance between stimulus and response. Instead of reacting automatically, the quiet individual pauses. That pause allows them to evaluate the situation rather than simply responding to it. This simple difference changes the entire dynamic. Emotional reactions often escalate conflict. Measured responses often dissolve it. The person who controls their words often controls the direction of the conversation. And control rarely belongs to the person speaking the most. It belongs to the person choosing when to speak. Now consider your own conversations. How often do you speak simply to avoid silence? How often do you explain ideas fully when a single sentence would communicate the same point? How often do you reveal opinions before understanding the dynamics of the room? These habits are common because conversation rewards speed, but strategy rewards patience. The person who listens longer understands more. The person who observes quietly identifies patterns others overlook. And the person who speaks selectively creates the kind of psychological presence that constant talking rarely produces. Silence is not empty, it is observation, it is discipline. And sometimes it is the simplest way to remind others that your attention is deliberate rather than automatic. The goal is not to become silent in every situation. The goal is to become intentional. Speak when your words clarify something important. Speak when your perspective improves the conversation. But resist the impulse to speak simply because silence feels uncomfortable. Because in many environments, the individual who controls their words controls their presence. and the individual who controls their presence often influences the direction of the room. Silence does not weaken influence. Used correctly, it concentrates it. And the person who understands that principle rarely needs to raise their voice to be heard. They simply choose their moments carefully, because the rarest voice in the room often becomes the one everyone listens to.